They looked me up and down and told me I didn't belong. Not in that restaurant, not at my own father's birthday. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just stood there, waiting for the moment that would change everything. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever swallowed your truth just to keep the peace, then this story, it's for you. There's something surreal about standing in a place you know too well, yet being treated like a stranger. That night at Lucille, I was that stranger. My family had booked the most luxurious private room for my dad's 65th birthday, and I, his youngest daughter, wasn't welcome to join, not because I wasn't invited, but because I didn't look the part. I still remember the sting in my mother's voice when she whispered that I might be more comfortable waiting in the bar. I stood there, stunned, in my black dress and vintage pearl earrings, watching them laugh and network like I didn't exist. Diana, my sister, made it clear that I was an embarrassment in front of Dad's important guests. Thomas, my brother, smirked and offered to pay for my dinner, because clearly I couldn't afford it. The moment felt like slow motion, every dismissive glance burning into my memory. I wasn't dressed in designer. I wasn't loud about my achievements. But then, everything flipped. A voice called out, firm but respectful. "Madam CEO, your usual table is ready." The security guard wasn't just anyone. He recognized me, not as the poor sister or the family disappointment, but as someone who mattered. In a flash, silence spread across the room like wildfire. Their eyes widened. Their world shifted. You could have heard a pin drop. Suddenly, I wasn't the invisible daughter. I was the woman who ran a multi-million-dollar company, the regular guest at a restaurant my siblings had only dreamed of entering. And for the first time in years, they saw me, really saw me. Not because I demanded it, but because the world around them forced them to reckon with it. Before I take you through the full story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you love real-life stories about standing your ground and finding your voice, hit that subscribe button. This one's going to stay with you. My name's Stephanie Wilson, and I just turned 32. I live in Chicago, Illinois, in a modest but cozy apartment that overlooks the river. By most people's standards, my life looks simple. I don't flash wealth, and I've never felt the need to prove anything with brand names or big announcements. But that's the thing. When you grow up in a family obsessed with appearances, simplicity feels like rebellion. My father, Martin Wilson, built his construction empire from the ground up, literally. A self-made man with grit, vision, and a deep love for control. My mother, Pamela, came from similar roots, but reinvented herself as someone who belonged in high society. They taught us that success meant luxury, recognition, and being envied. And when I didn't chase that, I became the disappointment. Diana, my older sister, went to Harvard Law and loved reminding everyone of it. She had the walk, the talk, and the wardrobe. Thomas, my brother, was a high-end plastic surgeon, with a waiting list full of influencers and elite clientele. He drove sports cars that cost more than my yearly rent. To them, success had one face, and I didn't wear it. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the one who asked too many whys and liked books more than brunches. I got good grades, but it wasn't Harvard good, so it didn't count. My parents used to say I had potential, but it always came with a but. I wasn't flashy enough, loud enough, ambitious enough. They couldn't see that I was just ambitious in a different direction. So yeah, I became the girl they pitied at holiday dinners, the one who worked at a bookstore, the one they assumed had failed. But what they didn't know, what they never asked, was that behind that quiet exterior, I was building something that would one day make them all pause. From a young age, I felt like I was auditioning for a role that didn't fit. I tried. I really did. I got a business degree from a respected university. Not Ivy League, which was strike one, but solid. I even landed a job at a major corporation right after graduation. It had the perks, the suits, the titles, but none of it felt real to me. Every morning felt heavier than the last. My days were packed with empty meetings and fake smiles, and every night I came home drained. I started to feel like I was fading into someone I didn't recognize, a version of myself sculpted for approval. 2 years in, I quit. No warning, no backup plan. Just a gut feeling that I couldn't live like that anymore. When I told my family I left my job, they reacted like I'd burned down the family name. My mother called it a phase. My father looked away. Diana offered networking contacts. Thomas asked if I needed money. I smiled through all of it. They thought I was lost. But really, I was finally finding myself. Behind the scenes, I poured every penny I had and every hour of my day into building an edtech startup called Learning Bridge. It started in my bedroom, just me and a laptop. The mission? Create accessible tools for schools and students being left behind in a world going digital. No investors, no mentors, just passion, grit, and a stubborn belief that education should be fair. They all thought I was folding books at a dusty counter, and I let them. It was easier than explaining why their definition of success didn't fit me, but that choice came with loneliness, with doubt, with moments I wanted to scream, "Look at what I'm building," but I stayed quiet, because I needed to know, would they love me if they thought I had nothing? To everyone else, my family looked perfect, polished, educated, wealthy, the kind you'd see on the cover of a business magazine. But behind all that shine, love had conditions. Conversations revolved around achievements, not feelings. There was no space for vulnerability, only victories that could be showcased at dinner parties. I remember sitting through those family gatherings like I was on the outside looking in. My voice always felt a little too soft, my passions a little too idealistic. I wasn't launching court cases or reshaping people's faces. I was writing code, solving educational gaps, creating software for kids who didn't have tablets, let alone tutors. But that wasn't sexy enough for my family's narrative. You couldn't flex purpose in a Rolex. So they wrote me off as the sister with a soft heart and a thin wallet. And maybe part of me leaned into that image, quietly. It was exhausting to defend a life they had no interest in understanding. Still, I craved connection. I wanted to walk into a room and feel seen, not pitied. But the more I tried to bridge that gap, the more I realized they weren't just ignoring who I was. They needed me to stay small. My silence made their version of success shine brighter, and that realization broke something in me. So I built in secret, not out of revenge, not even out of pride, but out of a quiet defiance that said, I will become something meaningful, whether you see it or not. And for a while, that was enough. Until my dad's birthday dinner, when everything I'd buried came crashing to the surface. The night of the birthday dinner wasn't supposed to be dramatic. I wasn't planning a grand reveal. Honestly, I just wanted to be there, for my dad. Heart issues had shaken him a few months earlier, and despite our complicated relationship, I wasn't ready to lose him. I wanted to reconnect, start fresh. I chose a simple black dress, elegant, timeless, nothing flashy, but not careless either. It was the kind of outfit that says, I showed up, even if it doesn't scream designer. I slipped on my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only family heirloom I truly valued, and I took a breath, knowing I might regret walking into that room. My best friend Melissa had texted me before I left. You don't owe them anything. Just be you. She always had a way of grounding me. I clung to that thought as I rode the elevator up to the 40th floor, heart racing, palms sweating. I wasn't afraid of judgment. I was afraid of indifference. Because deep down, that's what hurt the most. Not the jokes, not the fake concern, but the fact that I could vanish from their lives, and no one would notice beyond the awkward silence at dinner. I wanted to matter to them, not for my money, but for the space I used to fill as their daughter, their sister, their equal. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, I see you. And I hope you see yourself in this story. Go ahead and subscribe if you want more real stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to hide your success just to be accepted? When I walked into Lucille, the staff greeted me by name. They always did. My company had hosted fundraisers there. I'd signed checks bigger than the restaurant's chandelier. But that night, I asked them to keep it quiet. Please, don't say anything. Not yet. I wasn't there to show off. I was there for family. I sat quietly at the bar, sipping sparkling water, watching the skyline glow. 15 minutes later, they all arrived like royalty. My mom in couture, my dad shaking hands like a senator, Diana and Thomas dripping confidence and cologne. They didn't see me at first, and maybe that was a blessing. When they did, it was like they'd spotted an uninvited guest. My mom frowned. Diana air-kissed me with disdain. Kissed. Thomas made a joke about discount stores. I smiled and handed my dad his gift, an original edition of his favorite Hemingway novel. He nodded, distracted, already eyeing the room for someone more impressive. Then came the moment I'll never forget. As the maitre d' led the group to the private room, Diana stopped and pulled me aside. Are you sure you belong here? She asked with fake sweetness. Can you even afford to chip in for Dad's gift? I laughed lightly. My stomach didn't. That was when everything changed. The judgment, the whispers, the sting of exclusion. And just as they were about to push me aside, that's when the security guard called me Madam CEO. That title didn't make me any better, but in that moment, it made them stop pretending I was nothing. I grew up in a house where appearances weren't just important, they were everything. Our family portrait wasn't framed in love, but in trophies, brand names, and perfect smiles for the country club newsletter. The walls were lined with achievements, not memories. Every holiday was an event, not a gathering. We were curated, not connected. My dad, Martin, had come from nothing, and made sure nobody ever forgot it. He wore his past like a battle scar, but chased wealth like he was still fighting. I used to admire him for his drive, but somewhere along the way, that drive turned into obsession. He built empires, but forgot how to build closeness. My mom, Pamela, played the role of the polished matriarch with Oscar-worthy precision. You'd never guess she once lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat. She scrubbed her past clean and replaced it with pearls and posture. She didn't just want us to succeed. She wanted us to be seen succeeding. And that's what defined our family culture. Be admired or be invisible. Diana learned early to perform excellence. Thomas mastered the art of status. They didn't just chase success. They flaunted it like armor. I, on the other hand, wanted something quieter, something real. And that made me the outlier. Every time I tried to be myself, I felt like I was coloring outside their carefully drawn lines. My dreams weren't loud enough. My path wasn't paved in prestige. And so, I slowly became the one we don't talk about much. Present in photos, absent from their admiration. Diana was the standard. Everything she touched turned to gold. Or at least, that's how it looked from the outside. She made straight A's, gave perfect speeches, and could charm a room with her resume alone. Harvard wasn't just her school, it was her identity. She wore it like a designer label. At every family event, she dominated the conversation. Not because she was the loudest, but because everyone leaned in when she spoke. Her legal career became the family crown jewel. My parents clung to it like proof they had done something right. I became her silent shadow, applauding from the sidelines. Then came Thomas. Flashier, more reckless, but just as revered. He drove convertibles through downtown like a movie star and booked client calls between parties. He wasn't just successful. He made sure you knew it. My parents bragged about him to everyone, even strangers. He was the fun one, the gifted one. Meanwhile, I was the one who loved to read, who liked to help people. My accomplishments were invisible next to theirs. I was introduced at dinners as the youngest, not the CEO. No one asked about my life unless it was to comment on how nice it was that I worked with books. The worst part? They didn't even mean to be cruel. They genuinely believed they were being supportive, offering advice, nudging me to be more like them. But what they never understood was that I didn't want to be them. I didn't want their version of success. I wanted meaning, not medals. After quitting my job, I didn't crash. I started building. I poured my severance and savings into an idea that wouldn't leave my mind. Education tech for underserved schools. Learning Bridge was born in a cramped studio apartment with secondhand furniture and handwritten plans taped to the wall. I kept it a secret for 2 reasons. 1, because I didn't need their judgment while I was still figuring it out. 2, because I wanted to know, if I had nothing shiny to show, would they still be proud of me? I didn't want love that hinged on LinkedIn titles or magazine features. In public, I played the bookstore clerk. It gave me peace. It gave me freedom. And most of all, it gave me space to build my dream, without the pressure of looking successful. No fancy office, no suit, just me, a team of 5, and a product that started changing lives in small but powerful ways. Within 3 years, we had school districts on board. Then, a wave of investment came. We launched programs in low-income areas across the country, but I kept living simply. Same apartment, same car. I didn't upgrade my life. I upgraded lives, and that meant more to me than any mansion ever could. To my family, I was the girl stuck behind a register, but behind the curtain, I was building an $80 million company from scratch. They thought I had fallen behind. They had no idea I was far ahead, but choosing not to look back. The last major family gathering before my father's birthday was Christmas. It was always a big production. Ornate decor, gourmet meals, and gift exchanges that felt more like financial exhibitions. I brought my mom a soft cashmere scarf, carefully wrapped. I had spent weeks choosing it. It reminded me of warmth, of quiet kindness. She opened it with a tight smile. "How thoughtful," she said, in that tone that always felt just short of approval. Diana laughed softly. Bet that cost her a whole month's paycheck at the bookstore. My cheeks burned. I tried to play it off, saying some people find fulfillment in helping others, but they weren't listening. Thomas chimed in, sipping wine like he was on a yacht. "That's what people say when they can't make money. It's called rationalization." My father said nothing, just looked at his watch, like he had somewhere better to be. I wasn't surprised. I was used to disappearing in rooms full of people who shared my last name. What they didn't know was that I had just closed a funding round that pushed Learning Bridge past an $80 million valuation. I had spent that month pitching investors, hiring engineers, and expanding into new cities. But none of that mattered to them. Not because they didn't know, because they didn't ask. That night I went home with the familiar lump in my throat. I had given up hoping they'd change. I just wanted to stop hoping it would hurt less. I was doing something that mattered. I just wished the people who claimed to love me would see it, not through status, but through me. A lot of people ask me, why didn't you just tell them? And the answer isn't simple. Part of it was fear, of being seen through the same lens they used on each other. If I told them, would I become a shiny object like Diana? Another pawn in their game of status one-upmanship? Another reason was protection. My success wasn't just about money. It was about impact. It was mine. I built it for students like me, who once felt invisible in a room. I didn't want that pure mission diluted by my family's obsession with appearances. I needed to keep it sacred, for as long as I could. But more than anything, it was a test, a quiet one. I wanted to know if I mattered to them without a title, without the wealth. If I showed up small, would they still make space for me, or would they shrink me further? Sadly, I already knew the answer. I just didn't want to admit it. Keeping the secret gave me control in a space where I otherwise had none. It let me protect the parts of myself they couldn't twist. It gave me distance, safe, strategic distance. But even with that armor, the rejection still cut deep, especially from the people who should have known my worth instinctively. They never passed the test, not because they weren't capable, but because they weren't willing. They had decided who I was a long time ago, and unless I fit that mold, I'd always be the other one. That's why I said nothing. I wasn't hiding. I was surviving. Of all the people I missed in my family, I missed my dad the most. We used to be close when I was little. Saturday morning fishing trips, quiet car rides, stories about how he started with nothing and built something. He used to tell me that integrity mattered more than money. That character outlasts cash. But somewhere along the way, that changed. The man who once bought me secondhand books with pride started measuring success in square footage and stock options. He became distant, not cold, just distracted. And the space between us grew until I wasn't sure if he even saw me anymore. He didn't criticize me openly, not like my mom or siblings, but his silence spoke louder. He stopped asking questions, stopped showing interest, and when he did speak, it was in half-hearted encouragements, like he was trying to be supportive, but couldn't hide his disappointment that I wasn't more like them. When he had a heart attack 3 months before his birthday, something in me cracked open. Fear has a way of cutting through pride. I didn't want him to die without knowing who I had become, without us at least trying to find our way back to each other. So I decided to show up, not as Madam CEO, not as the overlooked daughter, just as myself, hoping, praying that maybe, just maybe, he'd still recognize the girl who used to bait the hook while he told her stories about life and grit and believing in something bigger than yourself. The morning of my dad's birthday dinner felt heavier than it should have. I stood in front of my closet, holding up outfits like I was prepping for battle. I could have worn something designer. God knows I could afford it. But that would have been bending to their rules. I wasn't going to play dress-up for validation. I chose a simple, elegant black dress. It hugged me just right, without screaming for attention. My grandmother's pearl earrings added a touch of quiet class. They reminded me of someone who saw me before I needed to prove anything. I wore them like armor, gentle but strong. As I applied a touch of lipstick, my phone buzzed. It was Melissa, my ride or die since college. "You ready for tonight's performance?" she texted. I let out a half laugh. She always knew how to call things exactly as they were. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. My hands trembled slightly. She called instead of texting back. "Steph," she said, "you've got nothing to prove. Not to them. Not anymore. Just show up for you." Her words settled over me like a warm coat. And she was right. I wasn't going for applause. I was going because, despite it all, I still cared. After we hung up, I wrapped my dad's gift, an original edition of The Old Man and the Sea. It had taken me months to track down. Cost more than I'd admit, but it wasn't about price. It was about memory. He used to read that book to me when I couldn't sleep. I hoped, somehow, it would mean something again. I arrived 15 minutes early, hoping for a moment to breathe before the storm. The restaurant's skyline view always calmed me, like the city reminded me there was more to life than family politics. Sophia, The head hostess greeted me with a warm smile. She knew me, but I asked her to keep it quiet. "Of course, Miss Wilson," she nodded, discreet as always. I found a seat at the bar, ordered sparkling water, and waited. The hum of conversation filled the space, but in my corner it was still, peaceful. I breathed in slowly, trying to remember who I was outside their opinions. Then they arrived. My mom in a gown that sparkled like a chandelier, Diana with her husband, both perfectly curated. Thomas made sure everyone saw him hand his keys to the valet, his car louder than his words. They swept in like royalty. I stood up, gift in hand, and approached. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, offering a hug and the wrapped book. He hugged back, but it felt distant. His attention already wandered to the businessmen behind me. My mom's eyes scanned me like a receipt. "Couldn't you have made more of an effort?" she whispered. "You look understated." Diana leaned in with a practiced smirk. "Even the hostesses here are dressed better than you." Thomas followed, clapping my shoulder like I was his intern. "Still rocking the budget look, huh? Need a style loan?" I smiled tightly, swallowing the familiar taste of exclusion. And just like that, I knew what the night would be. We gathered near the private dining room. Guests chatted, sipping champagne, already caught in their own circles of power. I lingered near the back, used to that position. Just before we entered, Diana grabbed my arm, her grip like ice. "Steph," she said, voice low but sharp, "you're underdressed. Again." I looked at her, then down at my dress. "It's Dad's birthday, not a red carpet," I said quietly. She forced a smile. "This dinner costs hundreds per plate. Can you even afford to chip in for Dad's trip?" I blinked. So it was about money again. The same old dance, just new choreography. Before I could reply, Thomas showed up with a smirk. "Problem here?" he asked. "Dinner's about to start." Diana didn't miss a beat. "I just want Steph to be comfortable. This place might be a bit much for someone in retail." The fake concern was worse than open cruelty. It was meant to humiliate. Thomas raised his champagne. "Don't worry, little sis. I'll cover your meal. You can pay me back in gratitude." Laughter bubbled between them. My mother approached, tension on her face. "Maybe it's better if you wait in the bar. Important clients tonight. Let's not shift the spotlight." And there it was. The rejection, cloaked in politeness. I wasn't welcome. Not really. Just tolerated, if invisible. I stood frozen for a second, gift still in hand. The message was clear. In their eyes, I wasn't worthy to sit at the table I helped pay for, in the building I technically owned. Standing there, just outside the dining room, I felt the old familiar sting. Not just rejection, but erasure. I wasn't being excluded for what I did or said. I was being erased because I didn't look the way they needed me to. My presence didn't fit their image, so they tried to remove me from view. Diana literally stepped in front of me, blocking the door. "We only want successful people here," she whispered, loud enough for others to hear. Her voice was sugar-coated cruelty. Thomas laughed, sipping his champagne. "You'd probably feel more comfortable at an Applebee's anyway, right?" Guests were starting to look. Heads turned. The staff glanced our way, unsure if they should intervene. I could feel eyes on me, not in admiration, but in curiosity, like I was a scene from a reality show no one could look away from. And in that moment, I realized something deeper than pain. They weren't just embarrassed by me, they were afraid of what I represented, that someone could opt out of the chase for status and still be okay, maybe even happy, and that terrified them. So they had to dismiss me, belittle me, push me aside before I became a mirror they couldn't avoid. I was about to step away, take the hit and walk toward the bar, when it happened. A security guard approached, eyes firm but respectful. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Diana smiled with fake calm. "No problem. My sister was just leaving." But what came next flipped the entire script. The security guard turned to me, expression shifting from neutral to respectful recognition. "Ms. Wilson?" he said, his tone changing. "Madam CEO, your usual table is always available if you'd prefer." The silence that followed was electric. It sliced through the noise like thunder after lightning. Everyone froze. Diana's mouth parted slightly, her mask cracking. Thomas blinked, confusion spreading across his face. My mother turned slowly, her expression unreadable. For a moment, no one spoke. It was like they had just seen a ghost wearing a crown. The sister they thought was poor, had power. And then, the restaurant manager appeared, clearly summoned. "Miss Wilson," he said warmly, "we weren't aware you were dining with family tonight. Shall we prepare your usual setup on the balcony?" His tone wasn't just polite. It was deferential. the kind reserved for someone important. As if on cue, the head chef emerged from the kitchen. "Miss Wilson, I've just perfected the truffle risotto you loved last time. I'd be honored to prepare it personally." And then came the final blow. Emmanuel, the owner of Lucille, walked in, beaming. "Had I known you were coming, Stephanie?" He turned to my family, still speechless. "Your daughter hosted our most successful charity event here. Over $2 million raised for education. She also owns a stake in this building." I stood there calm, centered, not smug, just steady. Everything they needed to know had just been said. For me, Diana's confidence melted first. Her jaw tensed, trying to process this new reality. The sister she mocked was suddenly the person everyone respected. Thomas stood straighter, adjusting his collar. My mother stared like she'd seen a glitch in her carefully curated world. My father turned around, finally noticing. The shift in power was instant. People who'd ignored me began whispering my name. My siblings, friends, and colleagues glanced at me with curiosity, some even awe. I wasn't the background anymore. I was the center, and not because I demanded it, because the truth had arrived without my permission. There was a part of me that wanted to gloat, to throw every insult they'd ever made back in their faces, to laugh at their shocked silence. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because deep down, this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about release, letting go of the need to be seen, because I already was. I turned to Emmanuel and nodded. "Thank you. I'd still like to join my father's birthday, if I'm welcome." For a second, no one moved. Then Diana recovered, fake warmth flooding her face. "Of course. It was just a joke. Right, Thomas?" He nodded, clearly dazed. "Yeah, family humor." My mother looped her arm around mine, as if we'd always been close. "Darling, why didn't you tell us?" I gently pulled away, because I knew exactly how you'd react. Emmanuel gestured toward the private room. "Shall we?" And this time, I led the procession, with my head high and my story intact. As I stepped into the private dining room, the silence was almost theatrical. Gone were the smirks and whispers. Eyes followed me like I was a stranger who'd just revealed a secret identity. This wasn't the girl from the bookstore anymore. This was Madam CEO, and no one knew what to do with that. The staff shifted with new energy. Chairs pulled out, napkins offered with precision. It was clear I wasn't just part of the family anymore. I was a guest of honor. The same people who moments ago tried to block my entry now scrambled to include me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat near my father, where a chair had suddenly become available. For years, I'd been placed at the far end of tables, physically and symbolically. But now, here I was, center stage. My siblings looked shaken. My mother wore a smile so forced it could crack. And I was just breathing. I glanced out the window. The city lights flickered like a reminder. I didn't need this room's approval to shine. Still, it felt surreal. Years of being overlooked, belittled and misunderstood had built up like pressure in a dam. And now, that dam had finally broken. Not with rage, but with truth. And the most disarming thing? I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I just was. I had nothing left to prove. And that peace unnerved them more than any gloating ever could. They expected bitterness. What they got was composure. That's the power of knowing who you are, even when no one else does. Dinner began, but the air was thick with tension. My siblings launched into small talk, like they were auditioning for likability. Diana leaned over with a syrupy voice. "So, tell everyone about your company, Steph. I've always known you had big things coming." I raised an eyebrow. 5 minutes ago, I was a disgrace. I nodded politely. Learning Bridge develops educational tech for underserved schools. We've launched programs in 8 states, soon to be 12. The table went quiet, not because they were impressed, but because they were recalibrating. The girl they dismissed was now commanding their admiration circles. Thomas cleared his throat. "Wow, that's amazing. You always did love helping people." He sounded like he was trying out empathy for the first time. My mother leaned into the woman beside her, suddenly telling a tale of how she always knew I had potential. I nearly choked on my water. I answered their questions briefly, with practiced warmth, but I kept it light. I wasn't here to perform. I wasn't a showpiece for their redemption arc. I had spent years building a world where I didn't need their approval. Their curiosity was welcome, but their sudden pride felt hollow. Still, I stayed calm. Not for them, but for me. This wasn't a victory lap. It was closure in motion. I didn't need them to grovel. I needed them to understand. And maybe, just maybe, this dinner was the first crack in their polished armor. A crack wide enough for truth to get through. As the main course arrived, I noticed their nervous glances, They were still trying to play catch-up with the new version of me they didn't see coming. Diana shifted next to one of Dad's investors, eager to charm him. Thomas made half-baked jokes to stay relevant. But the power had shifted, and they felt it. The old dynamic didn't fit anymore. I wasn't playing the role they had cast for me. They were scrambling to rewrite the script mid-scene, and the harder they tried, the more obvious it became. They didn't know how to relate to me unless they felt superior. Now, they were simply lost. My mother smiled a little too much. "You know," she said, eyes darting, "you really should have told us sooner. We would have been so proud." I met her gaze. "That's exactly why I didn't." It landed like a pin drop. For once, she didn't have a rehearsed response. Just a flicker of something real. Regret. Maybe. I caught my father watching me quietly. His expression, unreadable. We hadn't said much since I walked in, but I could feel something shifting in him. Maybe confusion. Maybe shame. Maybe something deeper. He finally saw not just what I'd built, but who I had become without their applause. For years, I had hoped for this moment. But now that it was here, I wasn't interested in rubbing it in. I just wanted a real connection, if they were capable of giving it. And that's when my father leaned over and said, "Stephanie, would you join me on the terrace for a moment?" I nodded. The terrace was quiet. Terrace was tucked away from the noise and tension inside. The city spread out beneath us, lights blinking like a living mosaic. My father stood at the railing, hands in his pockets, looking older than I remembered. Not weak, just tired, like the weight of our years apart had finally caught up to him. "I had this whole speech planned for tonight," he said, not looking at me. "About legacy, about success, but none of it feels right anymore." His voice cracked a little, and for the first time in years, he wasn't performing. He was just my dad, the one I used to fish with before the world changed him. I stayed silent, letting the moment breathe. He turned to me, eyes searching mine. "When did I stop seeing you, Stephanie?" That question hit me harder than any insult ever could, because I had been asking myself that same thing for 2 decades, and now he was finally asking it too. "It wasn't one moment," I said gently. "It was hundreds of little ones. The ones where I did everything right, but still wasn't enough. Where I stopped being your daughter and started being a comparison." He looked down, nodding slowly. No defense, just truth settling between us like dust. "I was trying to protect you," he murmured. "From a life of struggle." I exhaled. "And in doing that, you made me feel like I had to struggle in silence just to be seen." He nodded again, and this time I saw it. Real remorse. Not pity. Not guilt. Just the raw ache of a father realizing he had missed too much. He leaned against the railing, eyes misty but steady. "That medical treatment I had, the one insurance denied, was that you?" I nodded. I had paid for the entire procedure anonymously, afraid that if he knew, he wouldn't accept it. Afraid he'd rather suffer than take help from the disappointment daughter. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice low. "Because I didn't want it to be transactional," I replied. "I didn't want gratitude to replace love. I wanted you to get better, even if it meant staying invisible." He closed his eyes for a second, breathing in the weight of everything he hadn't seen. "I thought you were just surviving," he said. "Turns out, you were saving lives, including mine." I felt my throat tighten. He had never said anything like that before, not even when I was a child winning awards or writing stories. This time, he saw me not for what I gave, but for who I was. "I'd like to get to know you again," he said softly. "Not as the CEO, not as the daughter who proved me wrong, but as Stephanie." That was the moment something broke and mended inside me. After all this time, he wasn't reaching for a title. He was reaching for me. "I'd like that too," I said, voice thick. And it wasn't just a polite response. It was real. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define the future. We stood side by side, 2 people shaped by pride, pressure, and finally, honesty. It was the beginning of something new. When we returned to the dining room, everything felt different. My father pulled out my chair himself, something he hadn't done since I was a teenager. The others noticed. So did the staff. His gestures weren't performative. They were intentional. And for once, he wasn't putting on a show. Throughout the rest of the meal, he engaged with me, really engaged. Asked about my team, my mission, the students we served. There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. The kind of curiosity that said, "I want to understand you," and that meant more than any apology ever could. My mother, watching closely, finally broke her silence. "Stephanie," she said, "would you come with me to the ladies' room?" Her tone was different, no longer sharp, but soft. I followed her, not out of obligation, but out of willingness. Part of me wondered if she'd say what I always needed to hear. In that mirror-lit space, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered. "And that's my fault. I was so busy trying to shape you that I never saw you." For the first time, she wasn't defending. She was surrendering, and something inside her cracked open. I didn't respond with bitterness, just truth. "You were protecting me from your past, but you built a future I couldn't breathe in." She nodded slowly, and in that moment, we weren't mother and daughter bound by duty. We were two women trying to understand each other beyond old expectations. Back at the dessert table, Diana cornered me with the grace of someone used to controlling every room. Her voice was low, but sharp. "So, all this time, you were just sitting on your high horse, judging us?" I held her gaze, calm, no more than you were judging me while I was beneath it. She flinched at the response, just enough for me to know it hit somewhere real. For years, Diana wore her success like armor. Law degree, expensive shoes, perfect husband. But in that moment, I saw the cracks. Behind her perfect posture, there was confusion, maybe even fear that her world was too fragile. "I've worked hard for everything I have," she said, like it was a defense against reality. "And I've never judged your work ethic," I replied. What I questioned was how little respect I got because I didn't match your definition of success. She blinked, unsure whether to fight back or surrender. There was a beat of silence. Then she looked away. "I've been jealous of you," she said quietly. "Even when I thought you were broke, you seemed free. I've never had that." Her voice cracked, just a little. Vulnerability from Diana was rare, and more valuable than any apology she could give. "You can still find that," I told her, "but it won't come from outside approval." She nodded, but said nothing. And for the first time, I didn't feel like her shadow. I felt like her equal, not because I'd finally achieved something she could respect, but because we were both finally being real. Thomas found me as the party began to wind down, standing near the balcony, drink in hand. He approached with less swagger than usual, a thoughtful look on his face. "So," he said, "while I was bragging about celebrity noses, you were building something that actually matters." There was no sarcasm in his voice, just quiet reflection. "I've been chasing recognition so long, I forgot why I started," he admitted. Plastic surgery was supposed to be about restoring dignity. Now, it's just selfies and status. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," I told him. "Your work can still matter. You just have to decide what you want it to stand for." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Maybe it's time I start shifting back to what matters. What really matters." Then he looked at me differently, not as his baby sister, not as the family underachiever, but as someone he respected. "Are you happy?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. "Most days," I answered, "because what I do feels meaningful." His silence said everything. He wanted that too. "I don't know how to undo the years," he said, eyes on the skyline, "but I'd like to start trying. Maybe we all would." I didn't promise him a clean slate, but I did nod. That night, we didn't fix decades, but we finally began building something other than comparison, something that could grow. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of the conversation, not its afterthought. My father sat beside me, not distracted, but engaged. He asked questions not out of politeness, but curiosity, and I answered, not to impress, but to share. This was new ground, and it felt fragile, but hopeful. The birthday cake arrived with fanfare, candles glowing like tiny flickers of possibility. Everyone sang, even my mother, her voice softer than usual. My father made a toast, not about his legacy, not about business, but about people, about how real success meant helping others succeed too. I saw his eyes land on me mid-sentence, not as a prop in his speech, but as proof of it. He had finally come full circle, from the man who believed in grit, to the one who lost himself in image, and back again, to someone who now valued substance over spectacle. It felt redemptive. After dessert, I noticed the seating had shifted. No longer were the important people huddled at one end. Conversations mixed. Laughter felt less performative. Something had cracked open in all of us. Not completely, but enough. And in families like mine, enough is sometimes everything. That night, we didn't become perfect. We didn't suddenly erase decades of misalignment, but we took off the masks, and for the first time, we looked at each other without scripts. And that was more healing than any formal apology could ever be. Later that evening, my mother pulled me aside again, this time without pretense. Her eyes, usually so polished and alert, were tired. I tried so hard to make sure none of you suffered like I did growing up, she said. I didn't want you to feel shame, so I built a life where that wasn't allowed. I listened carefully. Her voice carried a mix of confession and confusion. But I see now that in trying to erase my past, I erased your choices, especially yours. For the first time, she wasn't trying to rewrite the moment. She was living it, and the silence between us wasn't cold. It was sacred. You always scared me, she admitted. You asked questions I didn't know how to answer. You didn't follow the plan. I smiled softly. I wasn't trying to rebel. I was trying to breathe. She nodded, eyes glistening, and for once, she didn't argue. She just sat with the truth. I still don't understand everything you've built, she said, but I'm trying, and I'm proud of you, even if it took too long to say it. Her words landed gently, like a breeze brushing old wounds. Not a fix, not a redo, but a start. And sometimes, beginnings come quietly, in broken voices. We didn't hug right away. We just stood there, finally in the same emotional room. My mother wasn't perfect. She wasn't fully changed, but she was present. And I'd take presence over perfection any day, especially from someone who spent so long chasing a life that forgot to make room for love. As the night continued, the conversations deepened. No one was talking about cars or cases or condos anymore. They were asking real questions about fulfillment, about balance, even about regret. I watched my family slowly confront the hollowness of their own definitions of success and begin to reshape them. Diana admitted she hated the 80-hour weeks, that sometimes she cried in her car before court. That prestige didn't protect her from burnout. Thomas confessed that he didn't remember the last time he operated on someone who needed his help. And my parents just listened for once without trying to fix or spin. I didn't gloat. I didn't preach. I just shared what it felt like to build something that mattered, to wake up excited, to lead people with heart, not just hierarchy. And as I spoke, I saw their shoulders drop, like for the first time, they believed there might be more than one right way to succeed. We laughed a little more, not the polite kind, the kind that comes when walls start to come down. Someone even asked about the kids in our programs, what they were learning, what they dreamed of. My work wasn't a secret anymore. It was a story they now wanted to hear. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not because I conformed, not because I finally fit in, but because they were finally willing to meet me where I was. And maybe, for the first time, that table wasn't just a stage. It was a place to be known. By the end of the evening, the air felt lighter. The weight of comparison, of roles long assigned, had started to lift. We didn't solve everything. We didn't become a picture-perfect family, but we had begun to see each other. And in families like mine, that alone is a revolution. My dad shook hands with his guests, but came back to my side. Next week, he said, I want to visit Learning Bridge. I want to see what you've built. I nodded, touched. I'd love that. And I meant it. Not as a daughter trying to prove herself, but as a leader proud of what she had grown. Even my mom said she'd come. I want to understand, she said quietly. I want to try again. Diana offered to bring someone from her legal team to help with pro bono work. Thomas asked if there were opportunities for health outreach through the schools. It wasn't performative. It was real. That night ended not with applause, but with presence. We lingered. We said real goodbyes. And for once, I didn't leave with that familiar ache in my chest. I left with a soft sense of hope. That maybe, just maybe, we were no longer a family performing perfection, but becoming one, learning how to connect. As we stepped into the elevator, my father turned to me and said, You taught me something tonight, Steph. That success means nothing if it costs you the people you love. I didn't reply with words. I just smiled, because sometimes the loudest healing happens in silence. The following week, my family visited Learning Bridge. It was the first time they'd seen me in my element, not as a relative, but as a leader. I welcomed them like I would any other guests. But inside, I was nervous. This place held everything I'd poured myself into. It wasn't just work. It was me. As they walked through the office, they were quiet, not in judgment, but in awe. Engineers and educators moved with purpose. Teams brainstormed over whiteboards. A hallway full of student art lined the walls. For the first time, my parents saw what I'd built, not in theory, but in impact. I guided them through each department, showed them how our adaptive software worked, introduced them to team leads who shared stories of breakthrough moments with schools. They weren't impressed by dollar signs anymore. They were touched by results. And that shift meant everything to me. They watched a live video call with a classroom in rural Texas. A student explained how she was now reading at grade level, something her teachers thought might never happen. My mother's hand went to her chest. Thomas blinked hard. Diana whispered, "This is incredible." And it was. This wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about recognition. Not for what I had accomplished, but for who I had become. They were no longer guessing what I did. They were witnessing it. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand why I chose this path all along. Over the next few months, something surprising happened. My dad, the man who once valued titles over truth, launched a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs. He partnered with local schools, including some we supported, and offered guidance to kids without connections or capital. It wasn't just a gesture. He was in it. Week after week, he showed up, listened, taught, and even learned. He'd call me afterward to debrief, sometimes excited, sometimes emotional. He once said, "Helping them reminds me of myself, before everything got so loud with money." My mother began volunteering at a community center. At first, she kept it quiet, as if unsure how to explain it. But one day, she said, "These women remind me of who I used to be." She no longer clung to image. She started finding pride in empathy, not exclusivity. It wasn't fast, but it was real. Diana started taking pro bono cases involving education inequality. It wasn't a career overhaul, but it was a beginning. She told me over lunch one day, "These cases, they exhaust me in a good way." That was the first time I saw her light up talking about something other than a win. Thomas shifted part of his practice to reconstructive surgery for trauma survivors. His tone changed when he spoke about it. "It feels like medicine again," he said. "Not marketing, not prestige, just healing." And slowly, each of them began making space for something they'd long ignored: purpose. As for me, I kept building, not just the company, but the vision behind it. We expanded into refugee communities and launched new initiatives for students with learning differences. It was no longer about proving myself. It was about extending impact where it was needed most. Every step forward brought new challenges. But for the first time, I wasn't walking alone. My father helped strategize for our nonprofit arm. My siblings introduced me to networks that actually cared about the cause. We were collaborating, not from obligation, but from shared conviction. It wasn't always smooth. Old habits resurfaced. Egos flared. But the difference now was that we had something deeper than competition. Respect. The kind born from truth, from seeing each other fully, from finally learning how to let go of roles and meet as equals. I also started mentoring young women, especially those with dreams that didn't fit traditional molds. I told them the truth, that success means nothing if it costs you your identity, that being underestimated can be painful, but also powerful, that the quiet path can be just as impactful. One day my dad said something that stayed with me. "You didn't just build a company, Stephanie. You built a mirror, one that made all of us look at ourselves differently." I didn't need validation in that moment, but I felt something better: alignment. And that was worth everything. For the first time in my adult life, I felt at peace, not because everything had been resolved perfectly, but because I no longer needed their approval. I had lived too long waiting for recognition from people who hadn't tried to understand me. Now I was simply living, with purpose and clarity. There were still awkward moments. Sometimes my mother slipped into her old tone. Sometimes Diana tried to take credit for things she didn't do. But now, I could see it for what it was: residue from years of patterns, not personal attacks. I no longer reacted. I responded with grace. At family dinners, the conversations were different. Less about trophies and headlines, more about meaning. My dad even started telling stories again. Not about business deals, but about people he'd met in mentorship programs. There was depth now. It wasn't always easy, but it was honest. I stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I shared my accomplishments without shame, not to gloat, but to stand fully in who I was. My family still didn't always understand everything I did, but they respected it, and that small shift made a world of difference. The biggest change wasn't in how they saw me, it was in how I saw myself. I no longer filtered my joy through their lens. I was no longer seeking a seat at their table. I had built my own, and the people who wanted to join me there, on my terms, were welcome to stay. As our relationship slowly healed, so did our definitions of success. It was no longer just about income or recognition. It became about impact, about inner peace, about doing something that outlives you. And somehow, we all started to live by that, even if we never said it out loud. My dad once said, "Legacy isn't what you leave behind in wealth, it's what you plant in people." He began mentoring not just for the kids, but for himself. It reminded him of why he started with nothing, and turned it into something. Now, he wanted to help others do the same. My mom, ever the perfectionist, found joy in imperfection. She started baking for the women at the community center. Not fancy pastries, just simple banana bread and muffins. They like it better than the expensive stuff, she told me once. Maybe I do too. That was a breakthrough. Diana started speaking at public schools, not as a lawyer, but as someone who learned the hard way that success without joy is just performance. Thomas launched a fund to support medical procedures for underserved communities. They weren't just doing good, they were becoming better. And I watched it all unfold with quiet gratitude. Not pride, not vindication, just a deep knowing that change is possible, even when it feels impossible. You don't always need a dramatic moment to transform a life. Sometimes, you just need someone to go first. I had. Months after the infamous birthday dinner, we gathered again. Same family, same restaurant, but this time, it felt different. My name wasn't whispered in confusion. It was greeted with smiles. My story wasn't hidden. It was honored. I wasn't tolerated. I was welcomed. We laughed more, not the performative kind, but the belly-deep kind that comes from connection. My father raised a toast, not to status or success, but to resilience and rediscovery, to seeing each other, he said. Simple words, but they carried the weight of everything we'd survived. As dessert arrived, I looked around the table. There was still tension in some corners, old habits that would take time to fade, but there was also effort, willingness, and most importantly, presence. For once, I didn't feel like I had to protect myself. I could just be. This wasn't the ending I expected. It wasn't neat or cinematic. It was better. It was real. And maybe that's what healing actually looks like. Not perfection, but progress. Not erasing the past, but rewriting what comes next. Together. Choice by choice. That night, I didn't leave feeling vindicated. I left feeling seen. Not because I wore a title or earned respect, but because I stayed true to who I was, even when no one else could see it yet. And that was the kind of success I never thought I'd find, until I stopped needing them to define it. For years, I measured success the way I was taught, through titles, net worth, and the approval of others. But chasing that only made me feel hollow. True success, I've learned, is deeply personal. It's not what you can post about, it's what lets you sleep peacefully at night. It's living in alignment. Success now looks like impact, like the letters I get from students who believe in themselves again, like building a team that wakes up excited to work on something that matters. It's no longer about being the richest in the room. It's about being the most grounded in who I am. For so long, I thought I had to earn my place at the table. But the truth is, I was never meant to fit in at a table that didn't reflect my values. I was meant to build a new one where there's room for softness and strength, for purpose and power, for truth. I don't measure my days by accolades anymore. I measure them by moments. When someone feels seen, when a student learns to believe again, when my team feels like family. That's the metric that matters. The rest is just noise that used to sound like music to me. It took losing their approval to find my freedom, and it took being rejected to realize I was never truly rejected. I was being redirected, back to myself, back to what matters. And honestly, back to the kind of life I didn't just want to live, but love. I'd be lying if I said that night didn't leave marks. Rejection, especially from the people who raised you, doesn't just fade quietly. It lingers. It shows up in unexpected places, in your confidence, in your silence, in your doubt. But it also makes you resilient in ways nothing else can. I used to want an apology. I used to want validation, even a dramatic moment where they'd all say, "We were wrong." But now, I don't need that. What I needed more was to reclaim the parts of me that I had buried to belong. And that's what this journey gave me. The scars remind me that I survived something real, that I stood tall in rooms that tried to make me small, that I didn't cave, even when I wanted to shrink so badly just to be accepted. Now, I wear those scars like proof, not of pain, but of passage. I made it through. Healing didn't come with a lightning bolt. It came in quiet moments, like the first time my dad asked me for advice, or when my mom brought banana bread to the center without posting about it. It came in Thomas's call to say he'd operated on a burn victim pro bono. It came in time. This is what healing looks like. Not perfect, not linear, but present. It's choosing to love people and hold boundaries. It's recognizing who they were and who they're trying to become. And it's giving yourself permission to love them without ever abandoning yourself again. For so long, I chased belonging like it was a prize someone else had the power to give me. I thought if I worked harder, shined brighter, they'd finally open the door. But here's the truth. Belonging isn't given, it's claimed. And it has nothing to do with approval. Belonging started the moment I stopped asking for permission to be who I am. It began when I chose integrity over performance, when I stopped shrinking my dreams to fit their comfort. And once I did that, I started attracting people, not just tolerating them, who met me with depth. Ironically, once I stopped needing my family's validation, that's when they finally started to see me. But I didn't build my life for that moment. I built it because my soul demanded it, because staying small would have been the real loss, and I wasn't willing to lose myself again. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't wonder if I'm enough. I don't scan for approval. I show up as I am, with all the strength, softness, and story I carry. And if that's not enough for someone, that's okay, because I finally know I am not here to fit. I'm here to be. And in case no one's told you lately, your worth was never up for debate. You don't need to prove your light to people who've chosen to look away. Shine anyway, loudly, quietly, authentically, because the world needs your version of success, not the one they tried to hand you. I used to think that family defined your path, that blood meant destiny, but the truth is, family gives you your origin, not your outcome. Who you choose to become, that's yours. And I chose to build something different. Not perfect, not glamorous, just real. It wasn't rebellion. It was realignment. I wasn't trying to break tradition. I was trying to breathe, to build a life with room for meaning, not just milestones. And I've learned that sometimes, walking away from what you've always known is the first step toward finding who you really are. This life I've built, it doesn't come with applause or front-page features, but it's mine. It fits me like a second skin, and I don't need to explain it anymore. Not to my family, not to society. The people who need to understand will see it. And the rest? That's not my burden to carry. I've stopped measuring my growth by how many people approve of it. Now I measure it by how I feel in it. Do I wake up grounded? Am I proud of how I lead, how I love, how I live? Those are the questions that matter. And for the first time, the answers are clear. You can inherit habits, expectations, even fear. But you don't have to keep them. You can choose differently. You can build a life that isn't defined by what others dreamed for you, but by what your soul whispered when no one was listening. That's the life I chose, and it changed everything. There was a time I stayed quiet to survive, when silence felt safer than speaking, when not rocking the boat felt like the only way to stay afloat. But silence is heavy. It builds walls between you and the life you're meant to live. And eventually, those walls become cages. Finding my voice wasn't loud. It was steady. It started with small choices, saying no, setting boundaries, refusing to smile through dismissal. Over time, my silence became a whisper, then a word, then a whole truth I no longer apologized for. And that voice saved me. I've learned that speaking up isn't about confrontation. It's about connection. It's about saying, I'm here, and I matter, even if no one claps, even if no one changes. It's about claiming space you were told you had to earn, and realizing you never needed permission in the first place. My story didn't change hearts because I shouted. It changed them because I stayed, because I stood in the room even when they tried to push me out, because I let the truth speak for itself, and trusted that those meant to hear it would, and they did, eventually. So if your voice is still quiet, that's okay. Let it grow in its own time. Let it rise through the cracks they tried to bury you in. Because when your voice finally meets your truth, nothing can silence you again. Not family, not fear, not even the echoes of your past. That night at the restaurant could have ended in bitterness, and for a long time, it almost did. But what stayed with me wasn't the rejection, it was the clarity, the realization that who I am doesn't shrink when others don't understand it. It expands when I choose to honor it. Some people left that night emotionally, others stayed but began the hard work of changing, and that's how it goes. Not everyone comes with you when you grow, but those who do, who meet you in your honesty, those are the ones who belong, not just in your life, but in your healing. You don't have to hold on to people who only show up when you're shining. You hold on to the ones who stayed through your silence, who leaned in when you felt unseen. And sometimes those people surprise you. Sometimes they're the ones who once turned away, and now choose to return. My family isn't perfect. Neither am I, but we're learning to meet each other again, not as roles, but as people. That's what transformation really looks like. Not new clothes or job titles, but new conversations, new intentions, new chances to choose love over pride. So here's what I know now. What belongs, stays. Not by force, not by proving, but by truth. And anything that can't hold space for the real you, it's not yours to carry. Let it go. Because the life you're building, it deserves people who don't just watch it grow. They water it with you. If you've made it this far, thank you. Really, it means the world to me that you stayed, that you listened, not just to the story, but to the heart inside it. Maybe something in my journey mirrors a moment in yours. Maybe you've felt dismissed, unseen, or underestimated by people who should have known better. If so, you're not alone. And your story matters too. Let me ask you something. Has your worth ever been measured by things that had nothing to do with who you really are? If you've ever had to prove yourself in a room that tried to shut you out, drop a comment. I'd love to hear your story. Not for views, for connection. Because every time one of us speaks up, it gives someone else the courage to do the same. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button. Not just for the algorithm, but because it helps this kind of content reach more people who need it. And if you want more real-life stories that go beyond the surface, go ahead and subscribe. This channel isn't just about storytelling, it's about truth-telling. About honoring the messy, beautiful reality we all live in. And hey, if this video touched you deeply, and you want to help us keep creating content that actually says something, you can support the channel through the Super Thanks feature. It's that little heart icon with the $ under the video. Just click it, and choose the amount that feels right to you. Every little bit helps keep these stories coming to life. So wherever you are, whatever you're carrying, remember this. You don't have to fit into someone else's version of success. You just have to be brave enough to build your own. And when you do, the people who truly see you, they'll find you. Until next time, keep showing up as your real self. That's where the power is.